My mother told me to skip the baby shower because my sister's friends were all doctors. I simply nodded and said I understood. But while they celebrated, I was preparing a board meeting that would decide the financial fate of that very hospital. I do not need an invitation to the room anymore. I am the one holding the keys. My name is Lydia Hoffman, and at 34 years old, I have learned that the most dangerous things in the world are often the quietest. I was standing in my office on the 42nd floor of the North Shore Civic Trust building, looking out over the steel-gray expanse of Lake Michigan. Ridgeport is a city built on old money and new anxieties, a financial fortress in the Midwest where status is the only currency that actually matters. From this height, the cars down on the avenue looked like toys, and the people were invisible. That was how I liked it. It made the decisions easier. The North Shore Civic Trust does not have a logo on the outside of the building. We do not run television commercials with sad music and smiling children. We are a silent engine, a massive endowment that funds healthcare systems and educational infrastructures across 3 states. We move hundreds of millions of dollars annually, deciding which hospital gets a new oncology wing and which university gets a research grant. My title on the family group chat might be interpreted as a secretary, but in this room, I am the director of strategic operations. I hold the pen that signs the checks. My phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, vibrating against the grain of the wood. The screen lit up with the name Mom. I stared at it for a moment. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Mary Ann Hoffman did not call during the workday unless there was a crisis or a command. I picked it up, my voice practiced and neutral. "Hello, Mother?" "Lydia, honey, do you have a minute?" Her voice was breathless, light, the auditory equivalent of a silk scarf being pulled tight around a throat. "I know you are busy with your filing and your paperwork." I did not correct her. I never corrected her. "I have a moment. Is everything okay?" "Oh, everything is wonderful. Just wonderful. We are just finalizing the head count for Natalie's baby shower this weekend, and I wanted to talk to you about it." I turned my back to the window. The baby shower, the event that had dominated every family conversation for the last 6 months. My sister, Natalie, was the golden child, the resident at Brightwell Regional Medical Center, the one who saved lives while I pushed paper, or so the narrative went. "I have the gift ready," I said, glancing at my computer monitor where a shipping confirmation was still open. "I was planning to drive down on Friday evening." "Right," my mother said, and the syllable stretched out, thin and sharp. "That is actually what I wanted to talk to you about. I have been thinking, and honestly, Lydia, I think it might be better if you sat this one out." The air in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. I did not sit down. I stood perfectly still, my hand gripping the phone. "You want me to skip my sister's baby shower?" I stated. It was not a question. "It is not about wanting you to skip it," she said, her voice dropping into that conspiratorial tone she used when she was managing a social disaster. "It is for your own sake, sweetheart. Really, I was looking at the guest list, and honestly, it is entirely doctors, all of Natalie's friends from med school, her colleagues from Brightwell, the attending physicians. It is going to be very medical." "I see. They talk shop the whole time. Lydia, you know how they are. They will be discussing cases and surgeries and hospital politics. I just did not want you to feel out of place. You know, when people ask what you do, and you have to say you work in administration, well, I do not want you to feel less than. It can be intimidating being in a room full of surgeons when you are just doing office support." I looked at the glass wall of my office. Office support. The irony was so dense I could almost taste it. The hospital my sister worked for, Brightwell Regional, was currently 3 weeks away from a fiscal cliff. They had applied to the North Shore Civic Trust for a critical grant to overhaul their failing pediatric unit. I had the file on my desk. I knew their mortality rates, their staffing shortages, and their desperate financial mismanagement better than their own CEO did. But to my mother, I was just the girl who filed papers. "Sss," my mother continued, filling my silence. "I told Natalie that you were swamped with work. You know, tax season or audit season or whatever it is you girls do at the office. She was relieved. Honestly, she did not want you to be bored sitting in a corner while everyone else compared fellowships. She was relieved. That was the phrase that did it. It was not just protection, it was exclusion. They were ashamed of me. In the Hoffman hierarchy, saving a life was the only valid currency. Managing the funds that made saving lives possible was invisible labor. Blue-collar work in a white-collar suit. "Lydia, are you there?" "I am here," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was calm, terrifyingly calm. Usually, this would be the part where I argued. This would be the part where I tried to explain that a director of strategic operations is not a secretary, that I manage a portfolio worth more than the GDP of a small country. I would beg for a seat at the table. I would promise to fit in. But today, looking at the gray water of the lake, something inside me snapped. It was a clean break, silent and final. "I understand," I said. My mother let out a sigh of relief that sounded like a tire deflating. "Oh, good. I knew you would be reasonable. You are always so practical. Lydia, that is your gift. We will save you a piece of cake. And maybe we can do a family dinner next month. Just us. No doctors." "That sounds fine," I said. "Okay, I have to run. The caterer is calling. Love you." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it gently on the desk. The silence in the office rushed back in, but it felt different now. It felt charged. I walked over to my computer and brought the email confirmation to the front of the screen. Order confirmed. Bespoke hand-carved nursery set. Delivery to the Grand Ballroom. Ridgeport Country Club. The total at the bottom of the screen was $4,500. I had spent weeks selecting it. I had called in a favor from a craftsman in Vermont to get it rushed. I wanted it to be the centerpiece of the shower, a statement that even if I wasn't a doctor, I could provide for my niece in a way that mattered. I wanted to buy my way into their respect because I had never been able to earn it with my career. I stared at the number, $4,500. They did not want me there. They wanted my absence because my presence was an awkward footnote in their story of medical prestige. They looked at me and saw a filing clerk. They saw someone small. For years, I had internalized that smallness. I had walked into family gatherings with my shoulders hunched, avoiding questions about work, nodding along when my uncle made jokes about how safe my job was because the world always needs secretaries. I had played the role they wrote for me because I thought it was the price of belonging. But looking at that email, the cold clarity hit me. It washed over me like the lake water outside. This was not an accident. My mother did not forget what I did for a living. She chose not to know. It was a deliberate stratification. In their world, there were the heroes, and there was the help. And the help did not get invited to the gala, even if the help paid for the building. I reached for my mouse and clicked on the shipping confirmation. With 2 swift clicks, I canceled the order. Your order has been successfully canceled. A refund of $4,500 will be issued to your card within 5 to 7 business days. I did not feel a pang of guilt. I felt lighter. I minimized the shopping tab and opened the secure folder on my desktop labeled Board Review, Q3 Allocations. Inside was the dossier for Brightwell Regional Medical Center. It was thick with PDFs, financial audits, cultural assessments, compliance reports, and right at the top was the pending application for the $30 million expansion grant. My mother was right about one thing. It would be awkward for me to be at the shower. It would be terribly uncomfortable for the doctors to make small talk with me. But not because I was an admin. It would be awkward because in 48 hours, I was going to call a board meeting that would bring their entire institution to its knees. I looked at the calendar. The shower was scheduled for Saturday at 1 p.m. I opened a new calendar invite. I typed in the subject line, Emergency Board Review, Strategic Risk Assessment, Brightwell Regional. I set the time for Saturday, 1 p.m. I was not going to the party, I was going to work. And for the first time in my life, I was going to show my family exactly what paperwork could do. Natalie is a third-year internal medicine resident at Brightwell Regional Medical Center. In our family, that sentence is not just a job description, it is a prayer, a brag, and a weapon all rolled into one. For as long as I can remember, my sister has been the protagonist of the Hoffman family saga. She was the one with the biology textbook open on the kitchen counter, the one whose exams required total silence in the house, the one whose exhaustion was treated like a holy sacrifice. I do not resent her for being a doctor. I resent the way her profession became the only metric by which our humanity was measured. Whenever my parents introduced us at cocktail parties or holiday dinners, the script was always the same. They would present Natalie with a beaming theatrical pause, announcing, "And this is Natalie. She is saving lives over at Brightwell." The guests would ooh and ah, asking about her shifts and her patients. Then, almost as an afterthought, the spotlight would dim as it swung to me. "And this is Lydia," my father would say, usually taking a sip of his drink. "She works over at the trust, handling the administrative side of things, keeping the files in order." Keeping the files in order. The first few times I heard it, I felt a hot, sharp spike in my chest. I tried to correct them. I was 26, fresh off a promotion, managing a portfolio of educational grants worth $15 million. I remember standing in my parents' living room, interrupting my father to say, "Actually, Dad, I am analyzing risk assessments for systemic funding in the tri-state area." The room had gone quiet. My mother laughed, a nervous, tinkling sound that signaled I had committed a social error. "Oh, listen to her," she said, patting my arm, always trying to make office work sound so dramatic. "We are just glad you have good benefits, dear." I learned then that my reality was inconvenient for them. They needed me to be the supporting character. If I was successful, powerful, or significant, it complicated the narrative of Natalie, the golden child. So, I stopped correcting them. I let them believe I was a glorified secretary. I let them believe the North Shore Civic Trust was just a boring building where I pushed paper from one side of a desk to the other. Silence became my armor. But silence is heavy, and carrying it for a decade changes the shape of your spine. I sat in my office chair, the silence of the room pressing against me, and I thought about Helen. My grandmother, Helen Hoffman, was the only person who never looked at me with that glazed, polite disinterest. She founded the trust 40 years ago with the fortune my grandfather made in steel, but she was the one who turned that money into an empire of influence. She was 5 feet tall, wore pearls that cost more than my parents' house, and could silence a boardroom full of men with a single arched eyebrow. She was the one who raised me, really. While my parents were busy driving Natalie to prep schools and science camps, Helen was teaching me how to read a balance sheet. She taught me that money is not just currency, it is energy. It flows like water, and if you control the dam, you decide who eats and who starves. I remember the last conversation we had before she died. I was 29, sitting by her bedside in the hospice wing, a wing, ironically, that she had paid for. Her hands were paper thin, but her grip was iron. "Lydia," she had whispered, her voice raspy but clear, "do you know why I left the voting shares to you and not your father?" "Because Dad would spend it on boats," I said, trying to make her smile. She did not smile. She looked at me with a terrifying intensity. "Because your father and your sister need applause. They need to be seen doing good. You are like me. You understand that true power does not need to be displayed. It does not need a gala. It does not need a round of applause. It just needs to be effective." She squeezed my hand. "Let them have their parties. Lydia, you keep the keys." I squeezed back, tears burning my eyes. "They think I am nobody. Grandma." "Let them," she said. "It is safer that way, until it isn't." I missed her so much in that moment that it felt like a physical ache in my ribs. Helen would have laughed at the idea of the baby shower. She would have called the doctors technicians and reminded me that without our funding, they would be performing surgery in a tent. But Helen was gone, and I was left with a family that had not asked me a single substantive question about my life in 5 years. That was the hardest part to swallow. It was not just the insults, it was the incuriosity. Natalie had never once asked me what I actually did. We would meet for coffee, and she would spend 45 minutes complaining about her attending physician, or the nurses, or the long hours. When she finally paused to take a breath, she would look at me and say, "Anyway, how is the office? Still quiet?" She did not want to know. She assumed there was nothing to know. I thought about the $30 million grant application sitting on my desktop. I thought about the phone calls I had fielded from senators and university presidents that very morning. I thought about the fact that I could pick up the phone and have the mayor on the line in 10 minutes. My family did not know this version of me because they did not care to look. To them, I was a fixed point. I was Lydia the reliable, Lydia the safe, Lydia who would never overshadow Natalie because Lydia did not have the talent for it. The realization settled over me, cold and final. The distance between my sister and me was not caused by our different career paths. It was not because she dealt with blood and I dealt with spreadsheets. It was because she did not respect me. It was that simple. You do not exclude someone you respect from a family gathering because you think they will be bored or intimidated. You exclude them because you are ashamed of them. You exclude them because you think they do not belong in the room with the important people. My mother's voice echoed in my head. Her friends are all doctors. The implication was clear. Doctors are a class. I was a servant. I swiveled my chair around to face the computer screens again. The cityscape of Ridgeport was beginning to twinkle as the twilight settled in. Down there, amidst the lights, was Brightwell Regional Medical Center. Natalie was probably there right now, walking the halls in her white coat, feeling important, feeling essential. She was likely telling her colleagues about the shower, laughing about how her sister could not make it because she was tied up with admin work. She had no idea that the admin work was about to consume her world. I placed my hand on the mouse. The anger was gone. In its place was a profound, crystalline focus. Helen was right. I did not need to be displayed. I did not need to go to the party and make awkward conversation with a room full of people who thought they were better than me. I had the keys. And for the first time in my life, I was going to lock the door. I looked at the clock. It was nearly 5 in the afternoon. The board members would be checking their emails soon. They would see the urgent meeting request. They would see the subject line regarding risk assessment. They would assume I had found something terrible in the financials. And they would be right. I had found a rot. But it was not in the numbers. It was in the culture. And a hospital that treats people like second-class citizens does not deserve a $30 million check from the Helen Hoffman legacy. I opened my drawer and took out a framed photo of my grandmother. I set it on the desk next to the computer. "Okay, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's be effective." The digital clock on the corner of my monitor read 12:59 in the afternoon. In a banquet hall at the Ridgeport Country Club, glasses of sparkling cider were being poured. Waiters were circulating with trays of miniature quiches. My mother was likely adjusting her corsage, and my sister, Natalie, was undoubtedly glowing in the center of the room. Surrounded by her tribe of white coats, they were celebrating the future. In my office, the air was recycled and cold. I was celebrating the present. I opened my Outlook calendar. The block of time from 1 to 4 in the afternoon was empty. It was a white void where the baby shower was supposed to be. I clicked on the empty space, and the new meeting window popped up. It felt less like scheduling an appointment and more like loading around into a chamber. I typed the subject line with deliberate keystrokes. Emergency Board Review. Strategic Risk Assessment. It was a vague enough title to induce panic, yet specific enough to demand attendance. In the corporate world, risk assessment is code for someone is about to get fired, or we are about to be sued. I moved to the body of the email. This was the delicate part. I could not sound like a scorned sister. I could not mention the baby shower, the exclusion, or the personal slight. If I did, I would just be the emotional administrative girl they thought I was. To destroy them effectively, I had to be exactly what they didn't believe I could be. A cold, objective fiduciary. I attached the Brightwell regional file. It contained the proposal for the $30 million grant, the capital infusion that was supposed to build their new pediatric wing, the very wing Natalie hoped to work in one day. Distinguished members of the board, I wrote, new information has come to light regarding the organizational culture at Brightwell Regional Medical Center. This data suggests a systemic misalignment with the core values of the North Shore Civic Trust. Specifically, we have identified a pervasive elitism and professional stratification that poses a reputational risk to our endowment. Before we release the $30 million tranche scheduled for next quarter, we must reevaluate the institution's leadership integrity. Attendance is mandatory. Virtual link attached. I did not name Natalie. I did not name my mother. I kept it sterile. I made it about the money and the reputation of the trust. I moved the cursor to the recipient field. There were 12 names. These were not casual acquaintances. These were captains of industry. There was the former CEO of a major automotive group, a retired federal judge, and the managing partner of the city's largest hedge fund. These were people who did not interrupt their weekends for trivialities, but they would interrupt anything for the safety of their money. I took a breath. My finger hovered over the send button. At the country club, someone was probably making a toast right now. Maybe it was Dr. Allman, the chief of surgery, making a joke about how only the smartest people end up in medicine. They were laughing. They felt safe. I clicked send. The email whooshed away. It was done. The gears of the North Shore Civic Trust began to grind. Within minutes, phones would start buzzing in pockets across the city. Golf games would be paused. Lunches would be interrupted. The beast was awake. But I had one more call to make. I picked up my desk phone. I did not use my cell phone because I wanted the caller ID to read North Shore Civic Trust, Executive Office. I dialed the direct line for Dr. Allison Grant. Dr. Grant was the chief medical officer at Brightwell. She was a brilliant surgeon, a formidable administrator, and the woman who had personally courted me for 18 months to secure this funding. She was also, I knew for a fact, currently at the Ridgeport Country Club eating cake with my sister. The phone rang 4 times. I imagined her frowning, looking at her clutch, seeing the number, and realizing she had to take it. Donors like us do not call on Saturdays unless the building is on fire. "This is Allison Grant," she answered. Her voice was tight, battling the background noise of chatter and clinking silverware. I could hear jazz music playing softly. "Dr. Grant," I said. My voice was smooth, devoid of any warmth. "This is Lydia Hoffman from the Trust." "Ms. Hoffman?" she said, her tone instantly shifting to a practiced professional warmth, though I could hear the confusion leaking through. "I am surprised to hear from you on a weekend. Is everything all right? I am actually at an event right now." "I know," I said. "You are at my sister's baby shower." There was a pause, a long, heavy beat of silence. The background jazz seemed to get louder. "I beg your pardon?" Dr. Grant asked. "Your sister?" "Natalie Hoffman," I clarified. "The internal medicine resident you are celebrating. She is my younger sister." I could practically hear the synapses firing in Dr. Grant's brain. She was trying to connect the dots. She was trying to reconcile the powerful director of strategic operations she had been negotiating with for a year with the resident she treated like a subordinate. She was trying to figure out why she didn't know this. I had no idea." Dr. Grant stammered. "Natalie never mentioned. What a small world. That is wonderful. You should be here. Lydia, we are just getting started." She was trying to recover. She was trying to pivot, but it was too late. "I am afraid I cannot be there, Dr. Grant," I said. "Oh, that is a shame. Work obligations?" "No," I said. "I am not there because I was asked not to come." The line went dead silent. The chatter in the background seemed to fade away, as if Dr. Grant had pressed the phone harder against her ear to block out the world. "I do not understand," she whispered. "My mother and sister felt that my presence would be uncomfortable," I continued, reciting the words with the precision of a prosecutor reading an indictment. "They felt that because I work in administration, because I just handle paperwork, I would not fit in with a room full of doctors. They thought I would be intimidated by the level of conversation. "Lydia," Dr. Grant started, her voice trembling slightly, "I am sure that is a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding, doctor. It is a cultural diagnosis." I leaned back in my leather chair. "And it brings me to the reason for my call. I have just convened an emergency session of the Board of Trustees." "A board session?" Her voice pitched up. "Now?" "Yes, now. We are reviewing the $30 million grant allocation for Brightwell." "But why?" "Because," I said, delivering the line that I had been carving in my heart for days, "I was not invited to the baby shower of the hospital I am funding." The silence that followed was total. It was the sound of oxygen leaving a room. It was the sound of a woman realizing that the hierarchy she had comfortably lived in, where doctors were gods and administrators were servants, had just been violently inverted. "Ms. Hoffman," she breathed. "Please, wait." "Check your email." "Dr. Grant," I said. "The meeting starts in 15 minutes. I suggest you find a quiet room. You are going to need to explain to my board why your institution believes the people who sign your checks are not good enough to eat your cake." I did not slam the phone down. I placed it back in the cradle with a gentle click. The silence in my office returned, but this time it did not feel lonely. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, and I was the one controlling the wind. I sat in the silence of my office, staring at the phone I had just placed back on the receiver. I did not need to be in the grand ballroom of the Ridgeport Country Club to know exactly what was happening. I knew the physics of power, and I knew the specific, suffocating gravity of social embarrassment. At that very moment, Dr. Allison Grant was standing amidst the pastel balloon arches and the towers of expensive diapers, clutching her phone as if it were a grenade that had already had the pin pulled. I could picture the scene with cinematic clarity. She was looking at my sister, Natalie, the guest of honor, the glowing mother-to-be, and she was rewriting her entire understanding of who Natalie Hoffman actually was. For 3 years, Natalie had painted a very specific portrait of me to her colleagues. I was the sister in admin. I was the one who pushed paper and typed memos. It was a convenient fiction that allowed Natalie to be the sole star of the family. Dr. Grant had swallowed that fiction whole. She had assumed I was a low-level secretary, perhaps someone who managed the front desk or coordinated the office birthday parties. Now, Dr. Grant was realizing that the low-level admin she had ignored was the same woman holding the pen over the $30 million lifeline her hospital desperately needed. The cognitive dissonance must have been dizzying. She was realizing that every time Natalie had rolled her eyes about my job, she had been mocking the hand that fed them. I turned to my keyboard. I was not done. I opened the drafted document labeled Compliance Addendum VR4 PDF. This was a policy update I had written months ago but never implemented. It was aggressive. It required any institution receiving funds from the North Shore Civic Trust to undergo a mandatory internal culture audit. It demanded anonymous staff surveys to detect elitism, bullying, and professional stratification. I attached it to a follow-up email addressed directly to Dr. Grant and the board chairman. Subject: Supplemental materials for immediate review. Dr. Grant, per our telephonic discussion regarding the exclusion of trust leadership from hospital-affiliated events due to professional incompatibility, please review the attached compliance standards. If your institution's culture deems administrative professionals unworthy of social inclusion, we must determine if that toxic hierarchy extends to patient care and interdepartmental cooperation. I hit send. The timestamp was 1:12 in the afternoon. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a second. I could almost hear the ping of the notification arriving on Dr. Grant's phone in that banquet hall. The tragedy of the situation was that my mother was right. The room was full of doctors, and doctors, when they are comfortable, have a very specific way of talking. I knew for a fact that the air in that room was thick with the casual arrogance of the medical elite. I later learned that right before Dr. Grant received my email, one of the senior surgeons had made a toast. He had raised a glass of champagne and joked that he hoped the baby had Natalie's brains so the child wouldn't end up in the civilian population. He had used the word civilian to describe anyone who didn't have a medical degree. Normally, Dr. Grant would have laughed. It was just a joke, right? Just a bit of tribal bonding. But with my voice still ringing in her ear and my email flashing on her screen, that joke must have sounded like a death knell. She was looking around the room and seeing liability. She was seeing a room full of people who thought they were gods, unaware that their Olympus was built on a foundation of checks signed by the civilians they despised. I watched the icon on my screen that indicated the status of the virtual meeting room. At 1:14 in the afternoon, the icon next to Dr. Grant's name turned from gray to green. She had joined the meeting. That meant she had left the party. I opened the video feed. Dr. Grant was not in her office. She was in the passenger seat of her luxury sedan, the leather interior visible behind her. She had clearly fled the ballroom and run to the parking lot to take the call on her tablet. Her face was pale. The festive fascinator she had worn to the party was gone, likely thrown into the back seat in a panic. She looked terrified. "I am here," Dr. C. Grant said, her audio crackling slightly. "I am so sorry for the delay. I had to step away from an engagement." "Thank you for joining us, Doctor," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the speakers of the 12 board members who were also logging on from their home offices and golf carts. "I believe you have the documentation regarding the cultural risk assessment." Back at the country club, the atmosphere must have been rapidly curdling. You cannot have the chief medical officer, the highest-ranking person in the room, the woman who controls careers, suddenly look at her phone, turn ashen, and sprint out of the room without casting a shadow over the festivities. Natalie would be confused. She would be scanning the room, looking for approval, looking for the validation she thrived on. She would see Dr. Grant's empty chair. She would see the hushed whispers of the other attending physicians who had noticed the boss's abrupt exit. The sweetness of the baby shower was evaporating. The hierarchy was breaking. My mother would be trying to salvage it. I knew her moves. She would be ordering the waiters to refill glasses, trying to turn up the music, telling everyone that Dr. Grant probably just had an emergency surgery to attend to. "She is so important," my mother would say, always saving lives. But deep down, Natalie would feel the prickle of anxiety on the back of her neck. She knew Dr. Grant was not on call this weekend. She knew there was no emergency surgery. She did not know yet that the emergency was me. I looked at Dr. Grant on the screen. She was reading the document I had sent, her eyes scanning the lines about elitism and exclusionary practices. "This language," Dr. Grant said, her voice tight, "it suggests a freeze on the current funding cycle." "It does not suggest it, Doctor," I said, looking directly into the camera lens. "It mandates it, until we can verify that the culture at Brightwell respects every link in the operational chain, from the surgeons to the janitors, and yes, to the administrators. Not a single dollar moves from our accounts to yours." Dr. Grant closed her eyes. She knew exactly what culture I was talking about. She knew exactly whose party she had just walked out of. And she knew, with a sinking dread, that she was going to have to go back in there eventually and explain to her favorite resident why the hospital's new wing, the wing that was supposed to be Natalie's future, had just vanished into thin air because Natalie's mother thought a secretary wasn't good enough to eat cake with doctors. "We have a quorum," I said to the board. "Let us begin." I adjusted the camera on my monitor one last time, ensuring the framing was perfect. Behind me, the expansive view of the lake was gray and steel-hard. A reflection of the mood I was bringing into the digital room. I was not the sister who had been disinvited from a party. I was the director of strategic operations for the North Shore Civic Trust, and I was about to give a masterclass in governance. The screen in front of me was a grid of 12 faces. These were not people who were easily impressed or easily frightened. They were titans of industry, men and women who controlled pension funds, real estate empires, and tech conglomerates. Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board, sat in his mahogany-paneled library, looking over his spectacles with the impatience of a man whose Saturday golf game had been threatened. "Ms. Hoffman," Sterling said, his voice rumbling through the speakers. "We are all present. Dr. Grant is on the line from her vehicle. You called this emergency session regarding the Brightwell allocation. I assume this is critical." "It is, Mr. Chairman," I said. My voice was steady, pitched low. I did not use a script. I knew the numbers by heart. "We are currently positioned to transfer $30 million to Brightwell Regional Medical Center in exactly 14 days. That capital is designated for the new pediatric wing. However, recent interactions and a deeper dive into their operational culture have revealed a liability that we have overlooked." I clicked a button, sharing my screen. A slide deck replaced my face on their monitors. The first slide was stark white with black text: cultural insolvency and operational risk. "We treat financial audits as gospel," I continued, moving through the slides. "We look at debt-to-income ratios and malpractice insurance caps, but we rarely audit the culture of the institutions we fund. My assessment is that Brightwell operates on a fractured hierarchy that poses a direct risk to patient outcomes and, by extension, our endowment's reputation." I saw Dr. Grant flinch on her camera feed. She was sitting in her car, the leather headrest framing her pale face. She knew exactly where this was going, but the board was still skeptical. "Lydia," interrupted Marcus Thorne, a venture capitalist known for his bluntness. "Forgive me, but I'm looking at their balance sheet. They are in the black. Their surgical outcomes are decent. Are we really calling a Saturday meeting because their bedside manner is lacking?" "It is not about bedside manner, Marcus," I replied coolly. "It is about systemic arrogance that leads to operational blindness." I paused, letting the silence settle for a second. "I will be transparent," I said, looking directly into the camera lens. This review was triggered by a personal interaction. Today, I was explicitly excluded from a social gathering of Brightwell staff, specifically my sister's baby shower, on the grounds that my role as an administrator made me unfit to socialize with medical professionals. I was told that the level of conversation would be too high for someone who handles paperwork. There was a shifting of bodies in the digital room. Someone cleared their throat. It was an awkward thing to admit, but I did not say it with shame. I said it with the cold detachment of an anthropologist describing a primitive tribal custom. "Giris." "Now," Arthur Sterling said, leaning forward. "That is certainly rude. Lydia, and I'm sorry your family treated you that way, but are we to freeze $30 million because your feelings were hurt? Is this a board meeting or a family therapy session?" It was the question I had been waiting for. The accusation of pettiness. The dismissal of my professional judgment in favor of an emotional narrative. I did not blink. "That is a fair question, Arthur," I said. "If this were an isolated incident of familial snobbery, I would agree with you. It would be an abuse of my position to bring it here, but I operate on data, not emotion. So, when that interaction occurred, I asked myself, if the leadership of Brightwell views administrative oversight as irrelevant and inferior, how does that manifest in their actual hospital operations? I clicked to the next slide. It was a graph showing staff turnover rates, broken down by department. I pulled the HR data for the last 5 years, I said. Look at the red line. That is the turnover rate for nursing staff and administrative support at Brightwell. It is 40% higher than the state average. Now look at the blue line. That is the rate of sentinel events, preventable errors that result in patient harm. The lines on the graph moved in perfect synchronization. As respect for support staff went down, errors went up. I dug deeper, I continued, my voice gaining a harder edge. I found exit interviews, hundreds of them, nurses who left because doctors refused to listen to their observations, administrators who resigned because their safety warnings were ignored by the medical board. The quote, "Just a paper pusher" appears in 3 separate wrongful termination lawsuits filed against Brightwell in the last 18 months. I saw Arthur Sterling take off his glasses. He was reading the slide intently now. I replied to your question. Arthur, I said, If my personal experience aligns perfectly with the systemic data, then it is no longer personal. It is a sample size of one that confirms a trend of 1,000. The arrogance I experience today is the same arrogance that causes surgeons to ignore the checklist a nurse is reading to them. And that arrogance gets people sued. It gets patients killed. And it wastes our money. Dr. Grant had covered her mouth with her hand. She was watching her hospital's dirty laundry being aired with forensic precision. "There is one more thing," I said. "Slide 5. The screen changed. It displayed a scanned document from 5 years ago. It was a grant rejection letter from the Hartford Foundation, another major philanthropic organization. "We were not the first ones they asked for this money," I revealed. "Brightwell applied to the Hartford Foundation 5 years ago for a similar expansion. They were rejected. I called a contact at Hartford 10 minutes ago to ask why. Do you know what they told me?" The room was dead silent. They told me that during the site visit, the chief of surgery interrupted the audit team to tell them they would not understand the complexity of the work. They lost $20 million because they could not treat the people writing the check with basic professional respect. I leaned back. The evidence was irrefutable. It was not about a baby shower anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that cost money. "We are about to hand $30 million to an institution that has a documented history of biting the hand that feeds it," I concluded. "They do not respect oversight. They do not respect administration, which means, by definition, they do not respect us." Arthur Sterling put his glasses back on. His face had hardened. The impatience was gone, replaced by the calculating look of a man protecting his legacy. "Dr. Grant," Sterling said, his voice slicing through the digital air. Dr. Grant jumped slightly in her car seat. "Yes, Mr. Chairman?" "Is this true?" Sterling asked. "Did your staff tell Ms. Hoffman she was not smart enough to attend a party with your doctors?" It was not phrased exactly like that," Dr. Grant stammered, her defense crumbling before it even began. "It was a family matter, a misunderstanding of roles." "It sounds like a very clear understanding of roles to me," Sterling said icily. "You think you are the kings of the castle, and we are just the bank." He turned back to the camera, looking at me. "Lydia, what is your recommendation?" "I recommend an immediate freeze on the strategic partnership," I said without hesitation. "We hold the $30 million. We place the funds in an escrow account. We demand a full external audit of their interdepartmental culture and a restructuring of their reporting lines. If they want our money, they need to prove they respect the mechanism that delivers it." "Seconded," Marcus Thorne said immediately. "Agreed," another board member chimed in. "Motion carried," Sterling said. "We freeze the money." The meeting had shifted. The atmosphere was no longer one of annoyance at a weekend interruption. It was heavy with the gravity of a massive financial guillotine falling. I looked at the screen. Dr. Grant looked like she was going to be sick. She had left a party celebrating the future of the hospital, only to watch that future evaporate in a 20-minute Zoom call. "Dr. Grant," I said softly, "I believe you can return to the shower now. I am sure there is plenty of cake left. You should enjoy it. It might be the last celebration Brightwell has for a long time." I ended the share. My face filled the screen again, calm and composed. I had not raised my voice once. I had not cried. I had simply done my job. And in doing so, I had reminded everyone, my family, the doctors, and the board, that the person who holds the pen is always more powerful than the person holding the scalpel. Dr. Grant looked trapped, through the pixelated feed of the video call. I could see the sweat glistening on her forehead. She was sitting in a luxury sedan that likely cost more than my annual salary when I first started at the trust, yet she looked as vulnerable as an intern on her first day of rounds. Arthur Sterling, our chairman, was waiting. He did not like to wait. "Dr. Grant?" Sterling repeated, his voice dropping an octave, which was his way of signaling that his patience had evaporated. "Ms. Hoffman has presented a correlation between your staff's elitism and your hospital's operational errors. I am asking you a direct question. Is the atmosphere at Brightwell Regional one of collaboration, or is it a caste system? Dr. Grant swallowed hard. I watched her throat move. She looked away from the camera, perhaps looking back toward the clubhouse where the party was still raging. She had a choice. She could lie to protect her colleagues and risk perjury and the loss of $30 million, or she could tell the truth and betray her tribe. Money, as it usually does, won the argument. It is stratified, Dr. Grant admitted, her voice barely a whisper. There is a significant divide between the medical staff and the administrative support. It is historical. Mr. Sterling, it is part of the culture of high-stakes medicine. The surgeons, the specialists, they view themselves as the revenue generators. Everyone else is viewed as overhead. Overhead, I repeated the word. It hung in the digital air like smoke. And today, I pressed, leaning into my microphone. At the event I was asked not to attend. Give the board a specific example of this overhead mentality. We need to understand the vernacular you use when you think the donors are not listening. Dr. Grant closed her eyes. She looked pained. There was a toast, she said. Dr. Aris, our head of cardiology, stood up to congratulate Natalie. He made a joke about how fortunate it was that Natalie's sister, you, Ms. Hoffman, had the good sense to stay in her lane. I saw Marcus Thorne, the venture capitalist on the board, raise an eyebrow. Go on, Thorne said. He said, Dr. Grant paused, flinching. He said, it is a relief to have a room full of people who actually understand the science, rather than having to explain it to someone who only understands how to fetch coffee. He said that if you were here, the IQ average of the room would drop 10 points. The silence that followed was absolute. I did not flinch. I did not look hurt. I looked vindicated. Thank you for your honesty, Doctor, I said. My voice was ice. For the record, I have a Master of Business Administration from Wharton and 15 years of experience in healthcare economics. But to your head of cardiology, I am someone who fetches coffee. Arthur Sterling took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. Jesus Christ, he muttered. They are talking like that about the sister of the woman managing their endowment in public? They did not know I was managing the endowment, I corrected him. They only knew I was an administrator. That is the point. Arthur, they treat the help with contempt because they think the help has no power. They assume that because I do not hold a scalpel, I do not hold any cards. I turned my gaze back to the camera, addressing the entire group. This is not just an insult, I said, driving the point home. This is a liability. If Dr. Aris speaks that way about a family member of a colleague at a social event, how does he speak to a nurse who questions his dosage during a shift? How does he speak to a risk manager who tries to tell him he is violating protocol? He ignores them. He belittles them. And that is how mistakes happen. That is how lawsuits happen. The board members were nodding now. The connection was made. The Mean Girls drama had been successfully translated into the language of corporate risk. I am prepared to make a motion, I announced. Is it for an apology? Sterling asked. Because I will demand Dr. Aris write you a letter by end of business today. I do not want an apology, I said sharply. I do not want a letter, and I certainly do not want a slice of cake. An apology is cheap. It is performance art. I am not interested in Dr. Aris feeling bad. I am interested in Dr. Aris changing his behavior. I pulled up the final slide of my presentation. It was a list of demands, drafted in stark, black and white text. I am proposing a conditional freeze on the Phase 3 funding, I stated. The $30 million stays in our accounts. It will be released only upon the successful completion of a third-party cultural audit. We will install an independent ombudsman at Brightwell for 6 months. This person will have the authority to sit in on departmental meetings, review HR complaints, and interview staff without leadership present. I saw Dr. Grant's eyes widen. An independent ombudsman was a hospital administrator's worst nightmare. It meant total transparency. It meant the end of the God complex, protecting the senior doctors. Furthermore, I continued, We require that every member of the senior medical staff, including Dr. Aris, complete a mandatory leadership training course focused on interdisciplinary respect, and I do not mean an online video they can click through. I mean a 40-hour in-person workshop. If they refuse, the funding is pulled permanently. That is aggressive, Marcus Thorne noted, though he sounded impressed. So is losing $30 million, I countered. We are investing in a hospital, not a country club for surgeons. We need to know that the institution functions as a team. I agree with Ms. Hoffman, said the retired federal judge on the board. Speaking for the first time, I have presided over enough malpractice suits to know that arrogance is the leading cause of negligence. If they cannot respect their partners, they are a bad investment. Arthur Sterling nodded. He looked at Dr. Grant on the screen. You heard the terms, Doctor, Sterling said. We are freezing the check. You have 48 hours to agree to the audit and the oversight. If you do not, we will publicly announce that we are withdrawing support due to governance concerns. You know what that will do to your credit rating. Doctor, Grant looked defeated. She knew exactly what it would do. It would be a death spiral. I understand, she whispered. I will convey the message to the CEO and the board. Do not just convey it, I said, my voice soft but heavy. Lead it. You are the chief medical officer. Allison, stop letting them run your hospital like a fraternity. I call for a vote, Sterling said. All in favor of Ms. Hoffman's motion to freeze funding pending a cultural audit? Aye, said Thorne. Aye, said the judge. Aye, came the voices, one after another, a chorus of assent from the most powerful room I had ever been excluded from. The motion carries, Sterling announced, unanimously. He looked at me. Good work. Lydia, you caught a rot before it spread to our balance sheet. Thank you. Arthur, I said. Meeting adjourned, Sterling said. The screens went black one by one. The last face I saw was Dr. Grant's. She looked at me for a long second, a mix of fear and newfound respect in her eyes, before her feed cut out. I was alone in my office again. The silence returned. I looked at the clock. It was 1:45 in the afternoon. At the country club, the baby shower was likely just moving on to the gift opening. Natalie would be sitting in a high-backed chair, surrounded by ribbons and bows, waiting for the check from the trust that was never going to arrive. She thought she was the center of the world today. She thought the only thing that mattered was the applause of her peers. But I had just rewritten the ending of her story, and the best part was, she did not even know it yet. She was still smiling, eating cake, and laughing at the jokes about her paper pusher sister, completely unaware that the paper I pushed had just crushed the foundation of her castle. The silence in my office did not last long. I knew the physics of gossip in a hospital. It travels faster than a virus. Dr. Grant would have returned to the ballroom, pale and shaken. She would have pulled the CEO aside, whispering urgently in a corner. The chief of surgery would have been summoned. The celebratory mood would have fractured. Hairline cracks spreading through the room as the senior leadership realized the ground beneath them had turned into quicksand. It took exactly 45 minutes for the shockwave to reach the residence. My phone lit up. It was not a call yet. It was a notification from a group chat I was not supposed to be part of. A link forwarded to me by a cousin who was also at the party. The message read, Holy God, Lydia, is this real? Below it was a hyperlink to the Leadership and Governance page of the North Shore Civic Trust website. I did not need to click it. I knew what it looked like, for years. My family had never bothered to Google me. They had never typed my name into a search bar because they assumed the results would be irrelevant. But someone at that party, probably a terrified administrator trying to figure out who had just frozen $30 million, had finally looked me up. And there it was, my headshot, professionally lit, looking out with a steely resolve, and next to it, the title in bold, sans serif font, Lydia Hoffman, Director of Strategic Operations and voting member of the board. The phone began to ring. The screen displayed Natalie. I watched it ring for a moment. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. I imagined her standing in the hallway of the country club, clutching her phone, her other hand likely trembling. She was looking at that website on her screen, seeing the face of the sister she treated like a servant, and realizing that face was the one looking down from the summit of the mountain she was trying to climb. I answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Natalie." "Lydia?" Her voice was high, thin, stripped of its usual confident cadence. It sounded like the voice of a child who had just broken something expensive. "Lydia, what is going on? Dr. Grant just left. She looked like she had seen a ghost. And then Brad showed me this link." "What link?" I asked, feigning a polite detachment. "The trust website," she stammered. It says you are a director. It says you are on the board." "Yes," I said. "That is my job title. It has been my job title for 4 years." But Mom said you were an administrative assistant. She said you worked in processing." "Mom says a lot of things," I replied calmly. I never corrected her because none of you ever asked. "Lydia, people are freaking out." Natalie's voice cracked. "Dr. Eris is shouting at the CEO in the lobby. Someone said the funding for the new wing is gone. They are saying it is frozen. That is my wing. Lydia, that is where my fellowship was going to be." "The funding is under review," I corrected her. "Pending a cultural audit." "Did you do this?" The question came out as a gasp. "Did you do this because Mom told you not to come?" "I did this because I did my job. Natalie, I assessed a risk, and it turns out the risk was valid." "You are ruining my life!" she shrieked. It was the old Natalie, the one who expected the world to bend around her desires. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Everyone is whispering. They are looking at me like I am toxic." "They are looking at you," I said, cutting her off with a voice so sharp it could have sliced steel, "because they just realized that your arrogance cost them $30 million. They are looking at you because for the first time, you are not the asset in the room. You are the liability." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, short and shallow. "Lydia, please, you have to fix this. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you are just my sister." "I am just your sister," I said. "But unfortunately for you, your sister is the one who signs the checks, and I do not sign checks for people who think I am beneath them." I hung up. I did not give her the satisfaction of a fight. I gave her the dial tone. 10 seconds later, the phone rang again. "Mom!" I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad. Voicemail. Then Aunt Carol. The phone was vibrating across my desk like a trapped insect. My family was reacting exactly as I predicted. They were not calling to apologize. They were calling to manage the crisis. They were calling to tell me to stop being dramatic, to put the money back, to stop making Natalie look bad. They still did not get it. They thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was acting out. They did not understand that I wasn't throwing a fit. I was issuing a judgment. I finally picked up the phone when my father called for the second time. "Lydia!" He sounded breathless, angry. "What the hell are you playing at? I have Dr. Grant's husband on the other line. He says you hijacked a board meeting. He says you are holding the hospital hostage." "I am ensuring compliance, Dad," I said. "Compliance? You are humiliating your sister. On her big day. Do you know how this looks? We are the Hoffmans. We support this hospital. We do not audit it. Actually, the North Shore Civic Trust supports the hospital," I said. "And as a fiduciary of that trust, my loyalty is to the endowment, not to your social standing." "Since when are you a fiduciary?" he scoffed. "You push papers. Lydia, stop pretending you are Helen. You are not your grandmother." "You are right," I said. Grandma Helen would have canceled the funding permanently the moment she heard that toast. I am being merciful. I am only freezing it. "Merciful? You are being vindictive. You fix this, Lydia, right now. You call them back and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you were, I don't know. Tell them you were emotional. Tell them it's PMS. I don't care. Just fix it so Natalie can walk back into that room with her head up. I laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. You want me to tell the board of directors of a billion-dollar trust that I froze $30 million because of PMS? I asked. Dad, listen to yourself. You are so desperate to keep Natalie on her pedestal that you are willing to professionally immolate me to do it. You would rather have an incompetent daughter and a doctor daughter than admit that the paper pusher is the most powerful person in your family. Lydia! No, I said. I am done listening. The audit stands, the freeze stands, and if you or Mom call me one more time to demand I violate my fiduciary duties, I will have the Trust's legal counsel send you a cease and desist for harassment of a corporate officer. Do not test me. I have the lawyers on speed dial. I ended the call and placed the phone face down. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from adrenaline. It was the rush of finally, after 34 years, knocking down the wall. I turned back to my computer. The emails were pouring in now, not from family, but from the board. They were requesting the timeline for the audit. They were suggesting names for the independent ombudsman. They were taking my lead. And then, a text message popped up on my personal screen. It was from Natalie. It was not angry this time. It was not demanding. They asked me to leave. I stared at the words. Doctor, Grant came back in. She pulled me aside. She said it would be optically better if I wasn't at the rest of the shower. She said my presence was agitating the senior staff. I read it twice. The irony was perfect, geometric in its shape. They had kicked me out to make the doctors comfortable. Now, the doctors had kicked her out to save their own skins. Lydia. A second text appeared. Is it true? Do you really control the money? For the first time in her life, she was asking a question about me. She wasn't telling me who I was. She was asking. I typed back a single word. Yes. The balance had shifted. The gravity in the Hoffman family had moved from the hospital ward to the corner office. Natalie was driving home from her own party, crying in a car filled with gifts she suddenly couldn't afford to enjoy. Realizing that the sister she had spent a lifetime looking down on was the only person who could save her career. And I was just sitting here, doing my paperwork. The knocking on my apartment door was not polite. It was a rhythmic, desperate pounding that shook the frame. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. The sun had set over Ridgeport, and the city lights were reflecting off the dark water of the lake. I had been expecting this. I walked to the door, my glass of wine in hand, and opened it. Natalie stood there. She was still wearing the white maternity dress she had bought specifically for the shower, but it looked wilted now. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared in jagged lines down her cheeks. She looked like a prom queen who had been pushed into a mud puddle. You, she hissed, pushing past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. You spiteful, jealous. How could you? I closed the door gently. I did not raise my voice. The time for shouting was over. This was the autopsy. Hello, Natalie, I said, walking into the living room and sitting on the beige armchair. I assume the party is over. The party? She spun around, her hands shaking. There was no party. Lydia, Dr. Grant came back in and told me to leave. My own boss told me to leave my own baby shower because my presence was creating tension. Do you know what that feels like? To walk past a room full of people who are whispering about you? To carry gifts out to the car while the valet looks at you with pity? I imagine it feels quite similar to being told not to come in the first place, I said, taking a sip of wine. It is not the same, she screamed. I was protecting you. I was trying to save you from being embarrassed by people you have nothing in common with, and you repaid me by nuking my career. You destroyed my reputation at the hospital. Lydia, Dr. Eris won't even look at me. The residents are terrified of me. You made me radioactive. I did not make you radioactive. Natalie, I corrected her. I made you accountable. Accountable for what? For a joke someone else made? For Mom trying to manage the guest list? She paced the room, her hands tangling in her hair. You did this on purpose. You sat in your office and you planned this. You waited until the worst possible moment to pull the plug. It was an ambush. It was a mirror, I said, and you do not like the reflection. I set my glass down on the coaster. The clink of the glass against the marble was sharp in the quiet room. Sit down, Natalie. I do not want to sit down. Sit down, I commanded. My voice had the weight of the boardroom now, the tone that made CEOs stop talking. Natalie froze. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in a decade. She saw the posture, the steel in the eyes, the absolute lack of hesitation. She sat on the edge of the sofa, looking small. You look down on me, I said. It was not a question. I don't... Stop, I cut her off. Do not lie. Not here. Not tonight. You look down on me. You think that because you cut people open and I balance ledgers, you are a superior form of life. You think my work is trivial. You think my life is small. Natalie bit her lip. She looked at her hands, which were resting on her stomach. I don't think you are small, she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought I was the one who made it. I thought I was the success story. And for you to be the success story, I said softly, I had to be the failure. Isn't that right? She did not answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Admit it, Natalie. The narrative only works if there is a contrast. The brilliant doctor and the dull secretary, the golden child and the background noise. You needed me to be lesser so you could feel more. That is why you never asked about my job. That is why you let Mom lie to your friends. Because if I am actually the director of strategic operations for $1 billion trust, then who are you? Natalie looked up, and tears were streaming down her face again, but these were not tears of anger. They were tears of exposure. I worked so hard, she sobbed. Medical school nearly killed me. Residency is a nightmare. I am tired all the time. Lydia, and everyone expects me to be perfect. Mom, Dad, the attendings. They all want me to be a star. And when I look at you, you are just there. You are safe. You are quiet. It made me feel better to think that at least I was doing something important. At least I was the special one. So you used me as a footstool, I said. You stood on my dignity to reach your pedestal. I didn't mean to hurt you, she pleaded. I liked the way it felt. I liked being the one everyone admired. And now they all know. They know I am the sister of the woman who controls their paycheck. They know I am not special. I am just a liability. You are not a liability because of me, I said. You are a liability because you bought into a culture of arrogance. You surrounded yourself with people who think they are gods, and you started believing you were one too. You thought you were too good to have your sister at your party. That is hubris. Natalie. And hubris always comes with a bill. I lost the funding, she said, her voice hollow. The pediatric wing. It's gone, isn't it? My fellowship. It was tied to that expansion. The funding is frozen, I said. Not canceled. Yet? Her head snapped up. Hope, desperate and fragile, flickered in her eyes. Can you unfreeze it? Can you call them? Please, Lydia. I will do anything. I will apologize. I will tell Dr. Grant I was wrong. Just don't let them fire me. Don't let this be the end. I cannot unfreeze it, I said. This is not a light switch I flip on and off based on how much you cry. This is a governance issue. The board voted. Then what do I do? She wailed. You do the work, I said. The board has demanded a cultural audit. An ombudsman is going to interview staff. They are going to ask about bullying. They are going to ask about elitism. And you? I leaned forward. You are going to be the first one to volunteer for the interview. What? You are going to walk into that hospital on Monday morning, and you are going to apologize, I said. Not to me, to the nurses you ignored, to the administrative staff you rolled your eyes at. You are going to publicly support the audit. You are going to tell Dr. Grant and Dr. Aris that the trust is right. You are going to stand up in that toxic echo chamber and say, "We were wrong." Natalie went pale. "They will hate me. Dr. Aris will make my life miserable." Dr. Aris is going to be in mandatory leadership training for 40 hours if he wants to keep his job, I said coldly. He is not the problem anymore. You are. You have to choose. Natalie, do you want to be a doctor who saves lives? Or do you want to be a snob who loses funding? You cannot be both. She looked at me, terrified. She was realizing that the sister who used to bring her soup when she was sick was gone. In her place was a woman who dealt in leverage and consequences. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I will do it. I will talk to the ombudsman. I will apologize." "Good," I said. "Is that it?" she asked. "If I do that, will you release the money?" "If the audit clears," I said, "and if the culture changes, then yes, the money flows." Natalie let out a long, shuddering breath. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked exhausted, broken, but also strangely relieved. The lie was over. She didn't have to pretend anymore. "I really didn't know," she said quietly, standing up to leave. "About your job. I really didn't know you were that powerful." "I know," I said. "That is the tragedy of it." She walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob, looking back at me. "I am sorry, Lydia, for the shower, for everything." "Good night, Natalie," I said. She left. The door clicked shut. I sat alone in the living room. It was done. I had broken her down, stripped away the arrogance, and set her on a path to actually earning the respect she craved. It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. I felt a sense of closure. I picked up my iPad to close out the files for the night. I was ready to pour another glass of wine and finally relax. But as I swiped to close the folder on the Brightwell audit, my thumb brushed against a subfolder I hadn't opened yet. It was labeled Vendor Conflicts and Third-Party Contracts. It was a standard report generated by our forensic accounting software during the preliminary risk assessment. Usually, it was boring stuff: laundry services charging too much, cafeteria vendors with expired licenses. But one line caught my eye. It was flagged in red. Consulting fees. Apex Medical Strategy Group. The amount was $150,000 over 6 months. I frowned. That was a high number for strategy consulting for a regional hospital. I clicked on the vendor details. Apex Medical Strategy Group. Principal owner. Mark Henderson. My stomach dropped. The glass of wine in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. Mark Henderson. Natalie's fiancé, the father of the baby whose shower I had just been banned from. Natalie had told us Mark was in medical sales. She said he traveled a lot. She never mentioned he was billing her hospital, the hospital where she was a resident, the hospital applying for my money, for strategy consulting. I opened the invoices. The dates of the payments aligned perfectly with the dates Natalie had started pushing Dr. Grant to apply for the North Shore grant. I stared at the screen. Natalie had just left my apartment, crying about her reputation, swearing she wanted to do the right thing. She had begged for the money to be released. She didn't just want the wing for her fellowship. She needed the money because her fiancé was siphoning it out the back door. And she had looked me in the eye and said nothing. I set the iPad down. The anger I felt before was a candle flame compared to the inferno that just ignited in my chest. This wasn't just arrogance anymore. This was fraud. And the board meeting wasn't over. It was just getting started. The glow of the iPad screen seemed to burn my retinas. I sat there in the dark of my living room, the city of Ridgeport humming outside, oblivious to the fact that I was staring at a smoking gun. $150,000. That was the sum total of the invoices paid to Apex Medical Strategy Group over the last 6 months. The descriptions of the services rendered were masterpieces of corporate ambiguity, stakeholder alignment, synergy optimization, and grant readiness preparation. They were the kind of buzzwords that look impressive on a ledger, but mean absolutely nothing in practice. I switched tabs to the Secretary of State's business registry. I needed to be sure. I typed in Apex Medical Strategy Group, LLC. The search result loaded in less than a second. Registered agent, Mark Anthony Henderson, principal address, 4402, Lakeview Drive, Unit 4B. I stopped breathing for a moment. Unit 4B. That was Natalie's apartment. That was where my sister lived. That was where the baby shower gifts were currently being stacked. Mark Henderson, Natalie's fiancé, the man with the dazzling smile and the vague job in medical sales that required him to travel 3 weeks out of the month, the father of my future niece. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the wine I had been drinking. This was not just a conflict of interest. This was embezzlement. This was fraud. And worst of all, it looked like my sister was the inside woman. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Natalie's name. 10 minutes ago. She had left my apartment in tears, promising to be a better person, promising to fix the culture at the hospital. I had believed her. I had actually felt a flicker of hope that we could repair our relationship. Now, I had to destroy her. I dialed. She answered on the first ring, sounding breathless, likely still crying in her car. Lydia, did you change your mind? Please tell me you unfroze the money. Where are you? I asked. My voice was no longer the voice of a sister or a board member. It was the voice of a coroner. I am almost home. Why? You sound weird. Do not go home, I commanded. Turn around. Come back to my apartment, right now. Lydia, I can't. Mark is waiting for me. We need to talk about what happened at the shower and... If you go home to Mark, I interrupted, you might be walking into a federal investigation. Turn around. Natalie, do not say a word to him. Just come back. There was a terrified silence on the line. She heard something in my tone that she had never heard before. It wasn't authority. It was fear. 20 minutes later, Natalie was back on my sofa. She looked worse than she had before. Her face was pale, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. What is it? She whispered. Did someone die? I turned the iPad around and slid it across the coffee table toward her. The screen displayed the invoice from Apex Medical Strategy Group, followed by the business registration showing Mark's name. Tell me you did not know, I said. Natalie looked at the screen, her brow furrowed. She squinted at the text. Apex? I don't understand. What is this? Look at the name, Natalie. She scanned down. She saw Mark Anthony Henderson. Her breath hitched. She pulled the iPad closer, her fingers touching the glass, as if she tried to wipe the words away. Mark? Why is Mark's name on a hospital vendor list? You tell me, I said. He has billed Brightwell Regional $150,000 in the last 6 months. The invoices were approved by the chief medical officer. That is Dr. Grant, the woman who just kicked you out of your own party. No, Natalie shook her head. A frantic, jerky motion. No, that's wrong. Mark works in sales. He sells surgical equipment. He doesn't do consulting. He doesn't work for Brightwell. He doesn't work for Brightwell, I said ruthlessly. He is leeching off of it. Natalie, look at the dates. I pointed to the first invoice, November 12th. Does that date ring a bell? Natalie stared at the date. Her eyes widened. That was the week I introduced him to Dr. Grant. We went to dinner, the 3 of us. Mark paid. He was charming. He talked about how the hospital needed to position itself for big grants. He wasn't charming. Natalie, he was pitching, I said. He used you. He used your position as the star resident to get a dinner with the chief medical officer, and then he sold her a bill of goods about grant readiness. He convinced her that if she hired his firm, they would secure the funding from the North Shore Civic Trust. But you are the trust, she whispered. Exactly, I said. He didn't know that. He thought the trust was just a faceless bank account. He was gambling that he could bill the hospital for strategy, and when the money eventually came through, which he assumed it would, because Brightwell is a major hospital, he would take credit for it. He was skimming off the top of the very grant you were begging me for. Natalie dropped the iPad. It clattered onto the table. She put her head between her knees and began to hyperventilate. He bought the nursery furniture, she gasped between sobs. He bought the crib. He bought the stroller. He said he got a bonus. He said business was good. He bought it with the hospital's money, I said. He bought it with the money that was supposed to go to the pediatric wing. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop. I have no choice. Natalie, this goes beyond culture. This is financial malfeasance. If Dr. Grant signed off on these invoices without a proper vetting process, she is either incompetent or complicit. Either way, the board has to know. Lydia, wait! Natalie stood up, reaching for me. If you report this, Mark goes to jail. My baby's father goes to jail. If I don't report this, I said, turning to face her, I go to jail. It is my job to audit these accounts. If I hide fraud to protect your boyfriend, I am an accessory. I typed the email. It was short. It was addressed to the head of forensic audit at the trust, copying Arthur Sterling. Subject: urgent. Potential vendor fraud identified at Brightwell Regional. Audit team: please immediately flag all payments to Apex Medical Strategy Group. Vendor appears to be a shell company with direct personal ties to hospital staff. Initiate full forensic review. I hit send. It is done, I said. Natalie collapsed back onto the sofa. She wasn't crying anymore. She was in shock. Her entire world, the perfect fiancé, the perfect job, the perfect future, had just been revealed to be a house of cards built on stolen money. My phone rang almost instantly. It was not family. It was Dr. Grant. She must have received an automated alert from the hospital's finance system, or perhaps the board had already reached out to her. I put it on speaker. Lydia. Dr. Grant's voice was unrecognizable. It was high, thinned by panic. What is this? I just got a call from Mr. Sterling. He is asking about Mark Henderson. He is asking about Apex. Hello, Dr. Grant, I said calmly. I suggest you get a lawyer. Lydia, please. She sounded like she was hyperventilating. Mark is a consultant. He helped us with the application. He said he had connections. He said he could guarantee the grant approval. I thought he was helping Natalie. I thought he was legitimate. You signed checks for $150,000 to the fiancé of a subordinate without disclosing the conflict of interest, I stated. And you paid him for grant readiness when the grant decision was entirely internal to the trust. You were scammed, Allison. And because you were too arrogant to think you needed to follow procurement protocols, you let a fox into the henhouse. I didn't know, she wept. I swear I didn't know it was a shell company. I just wanted the funding. We are so desperate for the new wing. Well, I said, looking at my sister who was curled into a ball on my couch. You definitely aren't getting the wing now. And Dr. Grant? The auditors will be there at 8 a.m. Do not shred anything. I hung up. The room was silent except for the sound of the wind rattling the window pane. Natalie looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow. He used me, she whispered. The whole time. He didn't love me. He just loved that I was a doctor with a rich hospital. He saw an opportunity, I said gently, and he saw a culture that didn't ask questions. He knew Dr. Grant wouldn't vet him because he was one of the family. He knew you wouldn't question him because you were too busy being the star. I sat down next to her. I didn't hug her. We weren't there yet, but I handed her a tissue. You have a choice, I said. You can go home and cry, or you can stay here. If you go home, you are standing by him. If you stay here, you are a victim who is cooperating with the investigation. Natalie looked at the door. Then she looked at me. I have nowhere else to go, she said. He paid the rent on the apartment with that money, didn't he? Probably, I said. She closed her eyes, tears leaking out. I called you a paper pusher, she said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. And it turns out, you are the only one who actually read the papers. Yes, I said. I read everything. The night was far from over. The collapse of Brightwell's leadership was just beginning, but for the first time in years, the Hoffman sisters were on the same side of the line. We were sitting in the wreckage, watching the fire burn, and I was the only one holding the extinguisher. The boardroom at Brightwell Regional Medical Center was designed to intimidate. It featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, a table made of imported mahogany that was long enough to land a small plane on, and portraits of past chiefs of staff lining the walls like silent judges. This was the inner sanctum. This was the room where the important people made decisions. This was the room I had never been invited to enter. On Monday morning, at 9 o'clock, I did not wait for an invitation. I walked in, placed my briefcase on the head of the table, and waited for the silence to settle. Dr. Grant sat to my right, looking like she had aged 10 years in 48 hours. The CEO of the hospital sat opposite her, his face a mask of controlled panic. Arthur Sterling and the rest of the trust's board were present via the massive video wall at the far end of the room, and sitting in a folding chair near the door, stripped of her white coat and wearing a plain gray suit, was Natalie. "Let us begin," I said. My voice did not echo. It absorbed the room. I laid out the evidence with the precision of a surgeon. I displayed the forensic audit of the invoices. I showed the time-stamped emails between Dr. Grant and Mark Henderson. I showed the flow of funds, $150,000 of hospital capital funneled into a shell company that paid the rent on my sister's apartment. "This is not just mismanagement," I told the room. "This is institutional blindness. You were so enamored with the idea of securing our $30 million grant that you bypassed your own vendor protocols. You allowed a conflict of interest to metastasize into fraud because the perpetrator was family, and he promised you what you wanted to hear." The CEO turned to Dr. Fant. His eyes were furious. "You signed these?" "I trusted the recommendation," Dr. Grant whispered, her voice barely audible. "You trusted the hierarchy," I corrected him. "You trusted that anyone connected to your star resident must be beyond reproach. You failed to verify." I turned to Natalie. This was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She could have stayed silent. She could have let Dr. Grant take the fall alone. But Natalie stood up. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She looked at me, then at the CEO, and finally at the video screen where Arthur Sterling was watching. "I am responsible," Natalie said. Her voice shook, but it was clear. I introduced Mark Henderson to this administration. I advocated for his services. I was blinded by my personal relationship and my ambition to secure the fellowship in the new wing. I did not see the theft because I did not want to look. She took a breath. "Effective immediately. I am withdrawing my name from consideration for the pediatric fellowship. I am stepping down as the resident representative for the grant committee, and I will fully cooperate with any legal proceedings regarding Mr. Henderson." The room was still. It was the first time I had ever seen my sister show true strength. It was not the strength of talent or intellect. It was the strength of humility. "Thank you, Dr. Hoffman," Arthur Sterling's voice boomed from the screen. "Your resignation from the project is accepted." I turned back to the table. "As for the North Shore Civic Trust," I announced, "our ruling is final. The $30 million allocated for the Phase 3 expansion is permanently frozen. There will be no new wing. There will be no ribbon-cutting ceremony." A gasp went around the room. "However," I continued, "we will not pull the existing operational funding. We will not punish the patients for the sins of the administration. We will continue to fund the current pediatric unit, provided that Brightwell accepts a full administrative restructure. Dr. Grant, your signature authority is revoked pending a probationary review. An external oversight committee, appointed by me, will approve every expense over $5,000 for the next 2 years." The CEO nodded slowly. He knew it was a mercy killing. I had saved the hospital, but I had killed their ego. "Agreed," the CEO said. "We accept the terms." "Good," I said. I closed my laptop. "Then my work here is done." I walked out of the boardroom. The heavy doors clicked shut behind me with a sound of finality. My parents were waiting in the hallway. They must have been summoned by the CEO, or perhaps they had just been hovering, terrified of the outcome. When they saw me, Their faces lit up with a strange, desperate hope. "Lydia!" my mother cried. Rushing forward, she reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. We heard you saved the funding. We heard you stopped them from bankrupting the hospital." "I secured the assets," I said coldly. "We always knew you were brilliant," my father said, his voice loud, trying to perform pride for the passing nurses. "I was just telling your aunt. Lydia is the sharp one. She is the one who really runs things." It was pathetic. It was the frantic backpedaling of people who realized they had bet on the wrong horse. For 30 years, they had hidden me in the back room. Now that I held the checkbook, they wanted to parade me in the front window. "Stop," I said. They froze. "I do not want your pride," I told them. "Your pride is cheap. It goes to whoever is winning. I do not want to be your sharp daughter now that it is convenient for you. I was the same person last week when you told me I wasn't good enough to eat cake with doctors." "Lydia, honey, we were just—" "I am going back to work," I said, walking past them toward the elevators. "I have a job to do, and unlike this family, I do not need an audience to do it." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The doors slid shut, cutting off the image of my parents standing confused and small in the hospital corridor. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the polished metal doors. I didn't look like a secretary. I didn't look like a support staff member. I looked like exactly who I was. The doors opened, and I walked out into the sunlight of the parking lot. I didn't look back at the hospital. I didn't need to be invited into their rooms, their parties, or their circles ever again. I realized then that I never needed their permission to matter. I was the one holding the keys, and from now on, I would be the one deciding who was worthy of walking through the door. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Lydia's revenge. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lila Revenge Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video reach even more people.